Hi, everybody. We'll give a talk on philosophy of mind and about conceptual reduction that will suggest that a conceptual reduction can be given even without giving necessary and sufficient conditions. And I will do that by using resources from the truthmaker theory. So to begin with, I will talk about the difference between levels of reality and levels of description. According to the view that advocates different levels of reality, our different vocabularies corresponds to different levels of being. A mental property is distinct from a neurological property, a biological property is distinct from a chemical property, and so on. But according to another view that supports that there is only one level of being, we are ontologically committed to physical entities, and the other vocabularies we use are just different ways to describe the physical. The metal vocabulary, for example, is just a different way to describe the physical. But today I will talk mostly about the distinction between the metal and the neurological, and ask whether we can give a reason to believe that the metal is reducible to the neurological. And I will do this by describing identity theory and truthmaker theory, two different views that say that the metal is reducible to the neurological. Then I will describe the multiple correlation thesis, the idea that a meta property is correlated with many different physical properties. And this thesis, I think, inspires a multiple realisability argument that concludes that the metal is realized by many different physical properties, but it is not identical to any of them. The metal is something irreducible to the physical. And I will suggest then a different argument, an alternative argument, the multiple truthmakers argument, that says that the metal is made true, it exists in virtue of many different physical entities. Sentences about the metal are made true by many different physical properties, and this doesn't imply different levels of being. And then I will describe briefly different traditional conceptual reductive accounts, what I will call strong conceptual reductive accounts, and then I will suggest my conceptual reductive account that involves weak conceptual reductions. The identity theory is the idea that every property is identical to physical property. For example, being in pain is identical to C fibers firing. Somebody is in pain if and only if they have C fibers that fire. And Lewis gives an argument for this view. He says that for a specific mental state, the argument for psychophysical identification can go like this. A mental state is identical to a causal role. The physical state is the occupant of this causal role. Therefore, the mental state is identical to a physical state. Alternatively, we can say that the metal is not identical to the neurological, but still there is only one level of being. There are only many levels of description. The truthmaker theory says that sentences about X can be true, even if it is not the case that there is an entity that corresponds to X, and all instances of this entity may be true these sentences. Instead, they may be true in virtue of a range of less than perfectly similar properties. For example, sentences about being in pain may be true in virtue of various neurological properties, maybe a different neurological property in humans, different neurological property in dogs, and so on. And before describing the multiple realisability argument, I will talk about the multiple correlation thesis that I think inspires the multiple realisability argument. And according to this thesis, each metal property M is correlated with multiple actual or nomologically possible physical properties. It seems very unlikely that humans, reptiles, Martians, robots, silicon-based human brains share a physical property. All these different animals seems to be in pain in virtue of different neurological properties. But still, accepting this, it's not clear whether the metal is something irreducible from the physical, or maybe a metal property can be reduced to many different properties. So according to the multiple realisability argument, that is an argument for non-reductive physicalism, the identity theory is true if and only for all metal properties M there exists a neural property N, such that necessarily an organism has M if and only if it has N. And Putnam then notices that it seems very unlikely that all animals are in pain in virtue of one neurological property. And because of that, premise one cannot be true. The brains of dogs, cats, humans are very different. So it seems very unlikely that all these animals are in pain in virtue of one property. And therefore, these non-reductive physicalists conclude that the identity theory is false. Therefore, metal properties are distinct from mineral properties. And I think I have an issue with this argument. I think given 4, the claim that the identity theory is false, 5 doesn't follow that the metal properties are distinct from mineral properties. This is the case because non-identity does not imply ontological distinctness. Non-identity is compatible with ontological reducibility. We have already seen that sentences about being in pain can be made true by various physical properties, or at least there is a view out there, the truthmaker theory, that says even if there are different truthmakers for a metal predicate, we cannot entail that the metal properties is something irreducible to the physical. So there is a gap from saying that the identity theory is false to premise 5. I think instead of 5, an alternative conclusion is possible. Metal properties are either distinct from mineral properties or ontologically reducible to mineral properties and other less than perfectly similar physical properties without being identical to them. The methodological principle of simplicity, the causal exclusion argument, and my reductive account that I will suggest later are reasons to believe that metal properties are ontologically reducible to mineral properties and other less than perfectly similar physical properties without being identical to them. I will not talk a lot about the other 2 reasons to accept ontological reducibility. I'll just say that the methodological principle of simplicity is a view that all else being equal, we have to prefer the ontologically simpler theory. The causal exclusion argument argues that a metal property and the neurological property are in causal competition. So if we want to save the causal efficacy of the metal, we have to reduce the metal to the neurological. This is one reason to be reductive physicalist, because otherwise we cannot claim that the metal has causal powers. It's causally efficacious. So if these 3 reasons are reasons to endorse a view that talks about ontological reducibility, we can conclude that metal properties are ontologically reducible to neural properties and other less than perfectly similar physical properties without being identical to them. And I think the multiple realisability argument relies on a strong conceptual reductive account. So I will describe some strong conceptual reductive accounts and then compare them with my own weak conceptual reductive account. And because I do this new distinction, I define conceptual reduction in a bit different and orthodox way. I say that conceptual reduction cannot occur whenever truths about one domain are explained by stating truths in another domain, independently of whether necessary and sufficient conditions are provided. So what people say sometimes as just conceptual reduction or conceptual analysis, I call strong conceptual reduction. And this is a view that we can give necessary and sufficient conditions for the truth of one domain by describing truths in another domain, thus reduce the former to the latter. According to this view, reduction is true if and only if for each metal predicate F, there is a physical predicate G, such that the sentence of the form X is F if and only if X is G is analytically true. So the idea that we can reduce being in pain to something physical if and only if whenever someone is in pain, they are in pain in virtue of one physical property, for example, C fibers firing. And concerning the claim about analytical truth, some views are called a priori entailment views of reduction because they claim that reductive claims are analytical truths. According to these views, physicalist is true if and only if every truth is conceptually entailed by PTI, physical truths, that's all truths, and dialectical truths. And they claim that we can conceptually entail a metal truth M from PTI if and only if M can be derived a priori using only logic and conceptual truths from PTI. And the idea here is that if we have a complete knowledge of the physical world and we can entail all the metal truths, then we have a reason to be physicalist. If we cannot entail metal truths from physical truths, then this is a reason to not be a physicalist. But another strong conceptual reductive account is an account that claims that reductions are empirical truths. They claim that we cannot do logical attainments, we cannot detail a priori the metal truths from the physical truths, but still we have another reason to be physicalist and believe that reduction is possible. According to this a posteriori attainment view, physicalist is true even though if every truth is attained by PTI truths and methodological principles. So the idea is that when we go out the world and do science, we notice that whenever we are in pain in virtue of C fibers firing, or otherwise being in pain is correlated with C fibers firings, and we may need to explain why this is the case. And the best explanation for why this is the case is that pain is identical to C fibers firing, and that's why we notice this correlation. So according to these views, a posteriori attainment view and a priori attainment view, F can be conceptually reduced even though if necessary and sufficient conditions concerning the correct application conditions of predicate F can be given. For example, being F is true about an object, even though if being G is true about an object. For the purposes of this distinction between SCR and WCR, it does not matter whether the reduction is a priori or a posteriori, an epistemological issue. We are more concerned with whether conceptual reduction is possible only if necessary and sufficient conditions are given. And I would say this is not the only possible conceptual reductive account. What I will suggest now, the weak conceptual reductive account is another plausible account. And according to this view, any conceptual reductive account that does not give necessary and sufficient conditions for the conceptual reduction of an entity, but it provides another way that conceptual reduction can be done, can be called weak conceptual reduction. My weak conceptual reduction is weak because it allows for infinite possible or actual truth makers for a higher level predicate and involves the notion of similarity. It does not attempt to present all the possible truth makers without mentioning anything else. An example of this weak conceptual reduction is the following. Someone possesses M, a metal property, if and only they possess N1 or N2 or N3 different neurological properties, or any other similar physical property. N1, N2, and N3 may have less than perfectly similar structures, and because of that, they affect less than perfectly similarly their objects. Even if we cannot mention all the possible truth makers of a higher level predicate, we can explain why different objects possess M. So we go out in the world, we see that being M is correlated with many different neurological properties, and we notice that all these neurological properties have a certain physical similarity. And I think this gives us a reason to believe that being M is nothing over and above the physical or the neurological. Just by noticing the neurological world and the physical world, we can explain why somebody is in pain or another metal property. We don't need to mention any metal property, any irreducible metal property. The similarity in the physical level is sufficient to explain the metal phenomena. And this is not just an infinite disjunction view. WCR is not a mere list of truth makers of a higher level predicate. It can help us to find out whether currently unknown cases satisfy a higher level predicate. The similarity between the different truth makers can be a tool that helps us to find out whether new cases are truth makers of a higher level predicate. For example, being a table, we can find different truth makers. We can notice different truth makers of being a table. We can notice the structural similarity between all these cases. And this helps us to understand whether new cases of arrangements of symbols are tables or not. But we are not concerned with similarity simplicity. We are concerned with similarity about certain aspects. We attempt to find out the similar aspects that make it the case that the metal phenomenon does not need to be something over and above the physical. Respects shouldn't be understood as properties of properties or aspects of properties. Respects are what we get when we abstract from particular properties and focus on certain ways to partially consider its properties. The relevant similarities may be structural similarities, like in the case of a table, but they can also be qualitative similarities, in the case of being in pain. And if the physical properties are both qualitative and dispositional, then this is not a problem for physicalism. While some reductive views are one-to-one, WCR is one-to-many. The difference is about truth makers. According to the weak conceptual reductive accounts, we can conceptually reduce one metal predicate to many physical properties. And the similarity is a primitive here. I don't think we can explain similarity in simpler terms, but if we need to have a primitive notion in our theories, similarity is a good notion to have as primitive because we have a primitive understanding of it. We understand it and we use it in our everyday life without any problem. I think WCR can be combined with either the a priori Tillman view or the a posteriori Tillman view. This is independent of them. What else is that we have to use the notion of similarity to find out which entities are reduced to other entities. Particular reductions of M to N1, M to N2 can be either analytic or empirical truths. My WCR account has an advantage over Heil's truthmaking theory that explains precisely why certain higher level entities are nothing but about physical entities. It lists similarities between all these different truthmakers, and this is an extra reason to be reductive physicalist. It lists several physical properties to show that the similarity between that's what I said. It motivates us to find the abstract similarities between different truthmakers of a higher level predicate. And these abstract similarities can explain why this phenomenon is just something physical. I think just with a priori Tillman view or a posteriori Tillman view, we cannot be reductive physicalists. We need to insert truthmaker theory there too. From a priori entailments, we are led to physicalists because we may be able to tell every truth from physical truths. But the multiple realisability argument leads us to not reductive physicalism. This is what Chalmers and Jackson argued for. But adding the truthmaker theory leads us to WCR. WCR motivates reductive physicalism. The similarity in a physical level is sufficient to explain why metal properties are reducible to physical properties. The physical can explain everything we want to explain, and we do not need to assume the existence of something irreducible to explain why M is correlated with different physical properties. The physical similarity shows that despite the physical dissimilarities between P1 and P2 and P3, we do not need to assume the existence of something irreducible to the physical to explain why the beings that are in P1 and P2 and P3 possess the metal property M. The similarity also shows why homologically possible cases are also physical. Only the physical similarity is needed to explain why these cases are merely physical and why they can be correctly described as M. So there are still some other views that can compete with mine, but I don't have the time to talk about them here. But if you want, we can discuss them in the Q&A. As I will just go to my conclusions now. I think that the multiple realisability argument relies on SCR, but another reductive account is possible, WCR. WCR motivates the multiple truthmakers argument instead of the multiple realisability argument. Therefore, even if the multiple correlation thesis is true, it doesn't follow that metal properties are distinct from physical properties. Only WCR can explain why different beings are in a metal state, even if they do not share all the same causal powers. WCR can explain why a metal property is nothing but about the physical. So it can explain why a metal property is an ontological free lunch. But I think as we have seen before by discussing the multiple realisability argument, a simple truthmaker theory, a simple a priori Tillman view, or a simple a posteriori Tillman view are not sufficient to explain why higher level entity is an ontological free lunch. But WCR can give such an explanation. This ends my presentation. Thank you for listening. Feel free to ask me any question in the comments or discuss something. Tell me if it wasn't clear. So thanks. Have a good day. Bye.